On Monday evening, the GLOBSEC cocktail was held with live music and networking opportunities among guests. Here are the highlights from day 2. We started the day off in the Danube space, hearing from a multitude of expert voices on NATO's presence in the eastern flank and how it's increasing its defense. In parallel, on our Maria Theresia stage, the Georgian Prime Minister described Tbilisi's struggle with Moscow and its continued occupation of its territory, while outlining its merits of joining the EU. Keeping with the theme of EU enlargement, the foreign affairs ministers of Austria, Bosnia-Herzegovina, North Macedonia, as well as the Deputy Minister for Europe and Foreign Affairs of Albania, agreed that the EU pathway is the only feasible future option for the continent. An important expert reflection on the lessons learned from the Ukrainian battlefield outlined what NATO and others can learn from Kiev and how to make the necessary policy changes. A similar fight for freedom and democracy was debated, as a range of voices, both from the media and political opposition figures, acknowledged the threat to the international media landscape and its adverse impact on civil society. The 10th edition of the GLOBSEC Young Leaders Forum engaged in a variety of panels and events, debating the most pressing global issues with major speakers. One hot topic that received special attention was a climate security debate hosted by the Slovak Ministry of Defense. GLOBSEC presented 2 critical reports: GLOBSEC Trends, dealing with disinformation across Central and Eastern Europe, as well as the annual See Her report, focusing on policy recommendations for temporary displaced Ukrainian women in Central Europe who fled the country due to war. With great power politics in resurgence, a renowned set of voices from government and the think tank world advocated for why global unity matters and how the situation in Ukraine will determine the potential outcomes in Taiwan. Switching to the Middle East, Israeli Foreign Minister Eli Cohen reiterated his country's support for Ukraine and the ongoing security situation in the region. With a global magnifying glass on Central and Eastern Europe, the foreign affairs ministers of Poland and Slovakia reiterated their respective countries' profound support for Ukraine's cause and its people. The burning issue of a potential regime change in Russia was deconstructed as speakers unanimously agreed that no change was possible until Putin exited. We ended the day with representatives from government and NATO outlining how the alliance has progressed since Russia's invasion of Ukraine and continues to take the necessary steps to defend every inch of territory. There are still more big names and highlights to bring you from Central and Eastern Europe's most important conference. Get active on social media and see you on day 3.
Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back for day 3 of GLOBSEC. How's everybody feeling? Good, awake, you made it. There's my seatmate. How are you doing, Secretary? Good. Well, we're glad to have you back. Thank you for returning and sticking with us through 3 days of amazing sessions and policies. They've asked me to kind of recap a little bit and lay out the day to come, and this is the big day that many of us have been waiting for. Last night was a great awards dinner, and like Secretary and I enjoyed it. Seated next to each other with Kirsty Kaljulaid, the former president of Estonia, and Jaroslav Šedevi, the Czech diplomat, former European official, both receiving their awards. And today, now we return to the policy format. Don't forget, we have our 3 stages. This is the Danube stage, the Maria Theresia stage in the hotel, and the boat down the river. Has anybody been on the boat yet? Yeah? Is it nice? Is it like, yeah? Do you have to wear boat shoes on the boat? No? Okay. That's what I keep asking that. Anyway, today we have our star keynote speakers, the EC Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, I have this wrong, and the French President, of course, Emmanuel Macron joining us, and the Prime Ministers of Slovakia and Croatia, and more. On this stage, the discussions will be about sanctions, Western Balkans, European unity, the future of Europe, even after the war. We're looking ahead already, and the global consequences of the war. Over on the other stage, there's other items, including the EU's capacity to act, security guarantees, and more. So, without further ado, our first panel will be joining us with Eva Maydell. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you had a nice evening last night, and so happy to see so many of you joining us today for what is a very important discussion. My name is Eva Maydell. I'm a member of the European Parliament, and I'm very honored that since a couple of months I have joined the GLOBSEC's economy and business stream as one of their advisors. Please welcome on stage our excellent panel. Vladimir Milov, Russian opposition politician and economist who's doing a lot of research on the impact of sanctions on Russia. Mikloš, former Minister of Finance of the Slovak Republic and chairman of MESA 10, a think tank. Ms. Ingrid Brocková, State Secretary of the Slovak Republic. And of course, Wilhelm Molterer, chairman of the board of directors of GLOBSEC. 10 months and 15 months and 10 months, 15 months, it seems like I was staying late at last night's dinner. Of course, 15 months and 10 packages after the EU imposed the first batch of sanctions against Russia, we see EU member states falling to agree on new sanctions, but most importantly, how to stop evasion and circumvention. I would start with Ms. Brocková. I think it would be important for the audience to hear whether we've reached the limit of consensus when it comes to sanctions. What are the signals that the European Union sends to its friends and foes with our inability to, or more like difficulties to act further?
Good morning to all of you. First of all, let me say this. I know that it has been said so many times since February the last year and also at this conference, but we cannot allow to be fatigue of assistance to Ukraine. That's absolutely critical, crucial, and we need to do our utmost to continue with our assistance, military, economic, humanitarian assistance to Ukraine. Because it is also about, this is also the war about our values. So that was in the beginning what I wanted to say, and the other thing what I want to say is that this is not, has not been the European problem, it has been the global challenge. And what I see is important that to help Ukraine, but at the same time to isolate Russia as much as possible on the international arena. And one of the tools what we have to isolate Russia are the sanctions. Your question whether we reached the limit of consensus, I don't think so. And I would like to, I think that there is a strong commitment and determination of the EU to continue with the assistance to Ukraine and to isolate Russia. So what are our strengths? First, it is the unity, and it has been really since the beginning of the conflict in Ukraine, it has been unprecedented unity of the European Union. Of course, the sanctions as a tool, they are painful, they are robust, they are painful to Russia in the short term, in the long term, but also they are painful to the members of the European Union. So we have to deal with that, and we have to find the tools how to compensate the most vulnerable member states of the European Union if the sanctions are imposed. The other strength what we have is the coordination. So it's not only the European Union, but it is also very strong coordination with other members of the international community. I would mention just the recent G7 summit in Hiroshima, which sent very strong signals to continue to support Ukraine. Also sent signals, very strong signals to China. So the coordination is a key. Of course, the target of sanctions are political, economic, and military elite of Russian Federation. And each package of the sanctions, now we are in the process to prepare 11th package of the sanctions. each process is each package has been a process. A lot of discussion in the European Union, but so far we have been able to reach the consensus, and we can proceed with the sanctions as quickly as we are able to reach the consensus. As I said, some of the areas are more vulnerable, more painful for some of the member states, some not. So it is really the question of reaching the consensus. And we can proceed with the sanctions as we are ready to transform. Because also when it comes, for example, to the energy, we have to have the capacity to somehow not to be so vulnerable. So what are our weaknesses? And I will conclude my first intervention with this. First, vulnerability is dependency on Russia. Long-term dependency, and this crisis, this war in Ukraine has shown us very well and very strongly how dependent in terms of energy we have been on Russia. Second weakness is a question about the effectiveness of the sanctions. And when it comes to the 11th package of the sanctions, most of the effort now is to concentrate where are the loops in the effectiveness, in the implementation of the sanctions, to have the most effective mechanism how to proceed with that. And third, I think weakness, what I see is that our communication with the Global South, that we somehow started a little bit later than Russia, so to fight the Russian narrative in the Global South countries is the critical when we want to proceed with further sanctions, and when we want to have a global support of a broader international community.
Thank you. That was an excellent opening to particularly Europe's position and where we stand. But I'll turn to Mr. Milov, because I think what we all wonder is, what is the actual impact of those sanctions? And perhaps if you could dwell a little bit into the data and facts and tell us about the effect that it has on the Russian economy. I'm asking this, of course, because we are very often confronted by different reports, and we kind of, are made to think and have the impression that Moscow is easily skirting those sanctions that are imposed. There's articles describing how marquee firms, whether in Armenia, Kazakhstan, or other countries, are funneling shipping of sanctioned goods. So if we can get into the numbers and the details, maybe that would be helpful for us to understand what's the impact, is it big, and it's not just a perception whether the sanctions work or don't work.
Thank you. The impact is quite significant, and it's progressing over time. So patience is needed. I remember the Cold War days. I don't remember any policymaker in the West running to his watch every 5 minutes and saying, oh, Soviet Union has not collapsed yet, meaning the deterrence is not working, nothing is working. Patience is needed. Effect of sanctions is clearly progressing over time. For once, this year, Russia is entering a full-blown budget crisis, something that Putin has managed to avoid last year because of the temporary surge in oil prices after the beginning of the full-scale invasion, but this is over now. So the budget crisis is coming at him fast. According to Russian Ministry of Finance, in the first 4 months of this year, the deficit of the federal budget exceeded the planned deficit for the whole year by 17%. And oil and gas revenue in the first 4 months were down 52% year on year. So oil embargo is working regardless of, we will talk a bit later about all these circumvention schemes, but sanctions are working. Most complex industries are collapsing. We're talking about car making, aircraft manufacturing, transport machinery, engine building, anything complicated, anything that depends on Western technologies and component parts is down dozens of percentage points year on year. And generally, you might see this misleading commentary. A lot of this commentary, unfortunately, is available in the West, and it's synchronized with Putin's psychological operation efforts. Putin's government wants you to concentrate on just a narrow handful of macroeconomic indicators which are misleading or manipulated. So they boast about low unemployment, but there is a very serious hidden unemployment, all this, unpaid leave, downtime, part-time working week. If you sum that up, total unemployment is about 10% of the workforce. We only had this high level in late 90s, right? Inflation is clearly underreported. Ruble exchange rate is clearly manipulated because of draconian currency controls that have been introduced. Just one illustration, India, which became a major Russian trading partner in the light of decoupling from the West, is absolutely refusing to trade in rubles because it says we cannot buy rubles under a fair exchange rate, which is probably 2 times cheaper than ruble is traded currently because of the capital controls and so on. GDP, according to Russian Statistics Agency, GDP is clearly broken down into wartime part, which is surging because of the military production. Like the biggest growth in industrial output last year were uniforms. 3 times production increase. We can see a lot of these uniforms rotting in Ukrainian battlefields. So there is zero multiplier for the rest of the economy from the wartime production. Anything civil, private, manufacturing industries, trade, telecoms is significantly down, added value-wise. So there is this split, which eventually means that the rest of the economy, which is not connected to the war, is contracting significantly. And the last point in terms of data, crisis of government finance and this budget deficit is the vital problem now because private investment is dead. Capital flight last year from Russia was the highest on record. We never had this figure even in the 90s, $227 billion. And central bank is projecting tens of billions of dollars of continuing capital flight for next years with no end in sight. So private investment is not coming. Remarkably, Chinese and Indian investment is not coming. Total accumulated FDI stock from China is just $3.5 billion after all these years. It's like next to nothing, and it's well below 1% of the total accumulated foreign direct investment in Russia. Indian FDI is $600 million. The total accumulated FDI stock. So it's important. Decoupling from the West really matters. It hurts Russian economy. Everything is only dependent on the government's ability to finance the economy, but it's shrinking because of the deficit. That's roughly the picture, and it's progressing over time.
Thank you. I will turn to Mr. Molterer, but I just want to remind you that once I'm finished with the first round of questions that I have for the speakers, I'll turn to the audience. So please give me a sign if you would like to ask a question. Mr. Molterer, you're familiar with the European industry like no other. And so I think it's important for us to touch upon now early on the discussion, what's the effect on Europe? With the latest package, the EU has sanctioned half of its 2021 exports to Russia. So what are the consequences of the sanctions to the EU economy? And I can paraphrase a little bit one of the Slido questions that we have here is, why do we need to keep up those sanctions if they cost more to Europe than Russia? Now, no one said that yet from you, but maybe you could interpret that in your answer. And I was wondering, when we speak about industry, whether our businesses learned to live without the Russian market and imports.
Well, one can turn the question in the other way around. What would it cost us if Ukraine disappears from the landscape? What would it cost if authoritarian regime is winning over democracy? That's the real key question. And of course, it's clear that if you do sanction, and if you are starting sanctioning somebody, this comes at a cost. That's normal. And that's absolutely something we have to communicate. We shouldn't be shy on that. First remark. Second remark, sanctions are just one part of a bigger picture. Because the European perspective and beyond Europe The Western perspective is, I think, based on 3 long-term pillars. The one is, yes, we have to keep the sanctions up and running. We have to tackle the aggressor. Absolutely clear. Secondly, we have to be ready to support Ukraine, not just now, but also in the long term. It's also a question of a long-term strategy, what we have to have. And third, the European Union has to work on the new global order. And there is something ongoing in the world that we underestimate to a certain point of time. This new global order is part of the bigger picture. Sanction is just one part of this very puzzle. If we go into the next steps, I think the European Union has shown strength, unanimity and boldness. And this has to be also, let's say, the recipe for the next steps to come. There are a few of them to be mentioned. I think one of the most critical areas where we have to do something is what you have said, coordination amongst the West. Second, to avoid the circumvention. And third, I think what's quite interesting is we should do more on the IT side. Because IT is a very critical thing in the long-term perspective, also in fighting the war, or to avoid fighting the war. From the European perspective, I think what we have underestimated, and here I'm quite clear, that we have to adapt ourselves way quicker and more substantially than we have done so far. I give you 2 examples. The one is, of course, yes, we knew that we are dependent on Russian, let's say, fossil energy, and we have made at the same time an effort towards climate change, towards whatever, more independence. But have we done this sufficiently enough, successfully enough, and on time? Not really. Second example. Why the heck have we made a system, have we put the system in place where electricity, the price of electricity depends on the price of gas? And then to the surprise of some, let's say, also the public opinion, gas price raised, electricity price raised, so. And then we had a problem. Why the hell hadn't we reacted faster on that? That means what is necessary for us is simply also to speed up our own capacity to adapt to this new situation. And this is a situation that will remain, and we have to be ready to do that. That's an issue for politicians. That's an issue also for economy. And interestingly enough, if you look into the reaction of the economy and the business sector, you see that they are acting extremely fast on the energy side, because this is a key thing for any production sector in Europe. If you look what happens in the capital outflow of Russia, it's serious what happened. If you look into the strategy to invest in other areas, it's significant what the European economy is doing. We have to be patient, we have to be strong, we have to be united, and to be honest, we have to react quicker.
Thank you. You focused a little bit on those political strengths that we need, but I will turn to Ivan, Mikloš. What is next in terms of concreteness when it comes to sanctions? Do we focus on what and who has to be sanctioned, or do we focus on the circumvention first and the evasion? How do we prioritize this, and also how do we prioritize getting the rest of the world on board? What should be, the plan from now onwards?
Yeah, thank you. Good morning. First, I think if we are speaking about sanctions, the same is true as if we are speaking about military assistance. It is unprecedented, but still insufficient, which means we have to go further, of course. And I think the most important and where it was not done enough are few areas. First one is managing how to use and manage assets, Russian assets, for the reconstruction of the Ukraine and compensating of all these damages and everything. We know that assets of the central bank was more than $300 billion, but we still don't know, it was not done enough for the processing all these legal procedures and everything to how to use this money for Ukraine, for compensating just part of the damages which was done. We have some good precedent. We have precedent from Canada, which approved law by which it is possible to use confiscated money or frozen money of the Russian state for this, but it is still not enough. Then another very important part is the shadow reserves. And this is just recently in February, March, there have been a series of articles in Financial Times wrote by Martin Sandbu, which was kind of estimated what we are speaking about if we are speaking about shadow reserves. Last year, current account surplus of Russia was $227 billion. From those money, about half was paid for reducing liabilities of Russian liabilities, but about half are still on the accounts of the, which means Russian dollars on accounts, more than $100 billion on account of the Western commercial banks mostly. It is another potential source. Now the figures, because as Vladimir correctly said, now last year was, these have been money which have been this money have been used, part of this half was used for manage the or reducing the effect of all these sanctions, and it was one of the reasons why finally inflation is lower, the ruble was not devalued so much, and so on. And now it is changing because from mid of last year, the budget is creating a lot of deficits, and current account surplus is much lower now, but still for the first 4 months of this year, current account surplus in Russia is $22.6 billion surplus. But last year, for the same period, it was almost $100 billion. And these money are another source of reserves for the Russia. But they are located in the Western countries, in the Western banking sector, which means it is necessary first to know how much and where it is, and then to create preconditions for at least avoid Russia to use this money for compensating the effect of the sanctions. This is first area. And during Swedish presidency of European Union, it was created working group which started to work with this, but we have to be much quicker and much stronger in this direction. Because there is political will in general, yes, we know that it will be necessary to have compensation and to use Russian money for this, but in reality, the progress is insufficient, which means this is first area. Second area, I think, are secondary sanctions, because that's true that the sanctions are limiting their effect through other countries which are not directly, which didn't impose sanctions. We know it from foreign trade figures, how much it was increased, for instance, import of Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, other countries from EU, and at the same time, how much it was increased export of those countries to Russia. In comparison with pre-war period, which means we can be sure that part of this at least is avoiding the sanctions. I think till now the US have been more effective in this secondary sanctions, imposing and monitoring, and EU has still a lot of reserves in this area, in my opinion. Another one is, it is similar, but it is how trade or goods which are going through Russia to other countries, how they are disappearing in Russia, which means this is another source how to do. In my opinion, these two areas. And then third one could be, for instance, other sanctions in financial sector like SWIFT. SWIFT was cancelled only just for few Russian banks, but Russia, as I have read somewhere, has about 300 banks which are using SWIFT system.
Thank you. That was very clear. I would like to bring in now the questions from the audience. There are a number of them on Slido. They're very direct, so I hope for short and clear answers. And then if anyone wants to take the actual mic, I see someone over here, we'll go to you. But first of all, to Ms. Brocková, there is a direct and clear question to you. If we look at the implementation of sanctions, their effectiveness and success, who is the authority in Slovakia to implement them?
Since the sanctions have multi-sectoral character, so the Ministry of Foreign and European Affairs is the coordinator on the national level, of course in the close cooperation with our permanent mission to the EU, and we have the task force with all respected line ministries to discuss possible impact of these sanctions on Slovakia. So this is the short answer.
Perfect. I will bring the lady from the first row. Please briefly say who you are and ask your question.
Yes, good morning. Thank you. My name is Victoria Wojcicka, and I represent International Center for Ukrainian Victory. I'm a former member of Ukrainian Parliament. Hello, Mikloš. Hello. We worked together for quite a long time and effectively.
I see.
And I have a very concrete question. Russia has been conducting unprecedented and dangerous attacks on nuclear assets in Ukraine from the beginning of the full-scale invasion. Russia, being a nuclear terrorist, blackmails not just Ukraine, but entire European continent. And by attacking especially the assets of the critical infrastructure, energy infrastructure that provides safety and security of Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. And so far, we see no reaction whatsoever from European Union on all of those risks, on all of those dangers that these terrorists are conducting. So the question is, when will European Union introduce sanctions on Rosatom? What are you waiting for? And what signal are you sending to Russia when it comes to the nuclear blackmail? Thank you.
Ivan, would you like to take that question very briefly?
I'm not sure if I'm the correct person for answering. I'm not the representative of the European Union. I know that.
Good advice.
But surely it is the threat of nuclear Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant is really real, and I don't know really what is the reason why not. Victoria, what do you question? Maybe because it is also why Rosatom was not included in the sanction. Maybe because some countries, including Slovakia, are still dependent on the Russian nuclear fuel for the nuclear power plants, which means sometimes it is not such easy as it looks on the first view. For instance, as example, not from the nuclear, but this grain export, and this was necessary. Unfortunately, even the US had to remove sanctions from one bank to create possibility to export also Russian grain to the global south, because otherwise it was under threat to have even overall export of Ukrainian grain through Black Sea, which means sometimes it is not such easy. Or we can speak about why US was not declared Russia terrorist state, because it has its consequences, and some of these consequences could be counter against the necessary changes. But I don't have some exact information to answer your question.
Let's go to Ms. Brocková. Maybe she can have a little bit more concreteness on that. But I think it's always important to see people that work on these topics to provide their opinion as well. Thank you, Ivan.
Yes, I think we care, and we really recognize the nuclear energy as a big problem, big challenge in terms of the security. But as it was, and we have had very intensive consultations and debate in the European Union how to approach this nuclear energy aspect. If I'm not mistaken, some of the on the technical level, some of the individuals have been already sanctions from the Rosatom. So, as I said in the beginning, in my introductory remarks, that we can can move as quickly as we are able to reach the consensus. We are able to move as quickly with sanctions as we are able to adapt to the new situation. And as it was said here, the energy is a very good example of it, that yes, of course, this war has been a wake-up call for Europe, because for many years we haven't accelerated the green transition as quickly as it would be wished. Of course, we would like to proceed much quicker, but this is also the opportunity for Europe to much more to accelerate to decrease the dependency on the Russian energy sources. And Slovakia is one of the examples of this, that the vulnerability of our economy is really very high.
Thank you. We have a question over there from Roland, but until the microphone reaches you, I will turn to Mr. Milov with a very quick question to you, as it's scoring the highest on the app here. Are the sanctions affecting Putin and his cronies personally?
To a limited extent. And I think one direction where sanctions have been lagging behind, really, so economic sanctions are far stronger than personal sanctions. And I think, I don't know why, but currently if we look at the Western sanctions list, we find hundreds of officials and employees of state corporations and beneficial owners of Putin's businesses. We need thousands at the very least to have an impact. We need to block, Navalny's Anti-Corruption Foundation has been publishing loads of information about their relatives residing in Europe, having property here. A guy who is chairing the tactical missile corporation, missiles which are being fired at Ukraine. His relatives are in Czech Republic right now, owning property, living there, and so on. So we need to do more here.
Very clear message, more personal sanctions. Speaking of reaching thousands, Roland.
Thank you very much, Eva. So I'm Roland Freudenstein from GLOBSEC Brussels. And I want to come back to the 11th sanctions package, whose main thrust is against circumvention of sanctions. And it sounds a bit like mopping up the leftovers, but in fact, there is some real political dynamite in this, in two senses. First, the disagreements among the member states are still massive at this point, because we're actually thinking about going after companies in third countries and even third countries themselves in order to prevent circumvention. So what's the update, maybe to Ivan Mikloš and Willy Molterer? What's your guess? Where will we end up among the member states on this? And the second one is what Ingrid Brocková mentioned. We're in a charm offensive to the global south, but at the same time, we're actually threatening to sanction some countries in the global south, from Turkey to India to whatever, in this effort to avoid the circumvention of sanctions. How are we going to play that?
We'll start with Willy.
Well, first of all, if you look into the history of the debate about the various packages on the sanctions, the story was always the same. Are we ready to manage? And finally, we managed. And to the big surprise of everybody, the European Union was acting bold, quick, and fast. And it's I would say, the logic consequence that the further you go, the more difficulties you will face. That's simply reality. That means it's not getting easier. I think we should be quite clear on that. It's not getting easier. The challenge might be even higher for all of us. But this shouldn't be used as an excuse not to do. And the key thing for me is threefold. The one is, I think we have to go into this issue of avoiding the circumvention. It's difficult, but it's absolutely clear and a necessity. Second, we have to start, or maybe it has already been started, but we have to do a next step in the IT sector, because this is also affecting us and our societies, by the way, because the war has reached our societies. That's simply the truth. And the third thing is to strengthen the alliance of the sanctioning countries. These are the three elements, but it's not an easy going. But sometimes that's simply politics. We have to act. no alternative.
Does anyone else from the panel want to quickly chip in on that point? Then I will take another question from the Slido app while looking if anyone from the audience would like to come in. We have limited time left. How is the EU working together with NATO to ensure that the sanctions do have maximum effect on the important assets of the Russian war apparatus? That's from Colonel Grunewald, who's probably here in the room with us. Ingrid?
How is the EU working together? Well, first of all, there has been very strong coordination between the European Union and NATO. Regarding the war apparatus in Russia, I just returned last week from China, where I have the political consultations with the Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and one of the messages what I sent, as many other EU leaders who visited recently Beijing, was to get some assurances that China would not get involved militarily with Russia. So I think it is somehow about the strategic communication of the EU and NATO and all of the allies to Global South and to other countries not to support Russia militarily. And when it comes to the IT, it's also very one important point of that, because with the sanction, one of the impact of the sanctions is really that Russia is somehow losing the technological, I'm not saying advantage, but technological equipments to be
they're being held back tremendously.
To be part of the which is the part of the necessary military equipment for Russia.
Yeah.
And that's important in the long run. We will see that that sanctions work really.
Yeah, I would like to thank the audience. You're very engaged, both on Slido. Excellent questions. We have a question over here, so I'll take this gentleman and a lady over there. And probably soon afterwards, we are going to have to wrap up this discussion.
Thank you. Eugene Cholly, Honorary Council of Ukraine in Montreal and President of NGO Ukraine 2050. I'd like to thank Mr. Molterer for pointing out that when we look at sanctions, we need to also evaluate or think about the impact if Ukraine would not succeed, which would be tremendously higher as a price tag than the sanctions that hurt to a certain extent not only Russia but the EU. But what is the real answer to the question of Russian disinformation that the EU is substantially more impacted by the sanctions than Russia?
I will take the other question as well, yes, and then come back to the panel.
Hello, yes, my name is Sandra Kaduri from Keeping Channels Open. My question's a very obvious one, I guess. How are sanctions affecting the cost of living for ordinary Russians and also freedom of movement for the middle classes? Is there any evidence that the extra difficulties are increasing anger against Putin and the war?
Affecting significantly, but there is not a direct connection. And mind you that this decrease in living standards has been progressing over time since the sanctions introduced in 2014. So Russian real incomes on average are about 15 to 20% down as compared to 2013 now. And there's also very significant deterioration in the quality of life. For instance, Russians got used to drive normal cars in the past 30 years. They might as well forget it. They only now have the Russian designed or Chinese stuff in terms of new cars to buy, and they're also terribly expensive. Air travel is becoming quickly something of a luxurious adventure, which is not really affordable. How does that translate in anger? Anger is there. That is pretty much detectable. But on the other side, there's fear. because for the first time since 1950s, big numbers of people are becoming criminally persecuted, and many of them receive lengthy prison terms just for saying the truth about the war, for posting a couple of things on the internet. These are multiple cases right now. And Russian prison is no fun. So essentially, if you get like 5 to 7 years in jail, it means that your life will be ruined. It's not that you just come out and live normally and so on. So Russians will overcome this fear over time. But this is a new development which constrains the anger from breaking out.
If I may to add, because yes, on one side yes, but on the other side it is necessary to say that still popularity, despite everything, this popularity of Putin, popularity of war is high. Now there are questions if they're reliable, these public opinion polls, but even Levada, which is independent institution, is arguing that yes, they are. And speaking about sanctions, it is very interesting figures. Russians are not afraid from sanctions. Figures are like that. At end of Russians have been the most afraid from sanctions at the end of 2014, after annexation of Crimea, where 51% have been worried. Then before war, in 2021, it was 32%. Then in March, after war started, it was 46%. But today, there are only 33% of Russians are worried from the sanctions. It is more complicated, unfortunately. And the effect of Russians' propaganda and of course, threat for people to be persecuted and so on, is something which is really, really strong and important, not only in Russia. Also, it was another question, I think, here, what to do with the Russian propaganda in EU and so on. And unfortunately, my country, Slovakia, where we are now, is very good, very bad example of the effectiveness of the Russian propaganda and helpless or very weak reaction of the government. Even government which is very pro-Ukrainian, which is very pro-Western, did almost nothing against this, and we see now the negative consequences of this propaganda.
Mr. Molterer wants to take the floor. Maybe if you could touch upon the question on disinformation. We have 4 minutes left, so I would like the other speakers to prepare 30 minutes, 30 seconds, 30 seconds, 30 minutes would be way too long. A 30-second, just very brief and short key message. What should be the next steps for the democratic world to take when it comes to sanctions? But perhaps Mr. Molterer, briefly on disinformation.
Well,
and
there are some extremely important aspects that go beyond the issue that we are currently discussing. First answer is, let's do more on cybersecurity, because this is a fundamental issue that affects also the economy. The second thing is, for me, why do we have rules for media there in place if it comes to newspapers? Why aren't we applying the same rules if it comes to media and on the screen, the electronic media? And my third answer is, why aren't we all turning into influencers?
Well, President Zelensky and his team are, and that actually really has helped the way the narrative has played out. But Mr. Milov, 30 seconds, what should be, even less than 30 seconds, if that's possible? So one sentence or two, what should be the next crucial step that we need to be taking?
Patience is needed, sanctions are working, and a more complex picture should be analyzed beyond just GDP figures or other macro. Circumvention is so far the key success of Putin. So avoiding sanctions is really thriving, and you should pay attention to that. I'd suggest that the European Union establishes an agency which monitors the sanctions compliance, like the American Office of Foreign Assets Control. You don't have anything like that, it is a problem.
Very concrete.
It needs people and experts tackling this.
Thank you. Ingrid.
First, no fatigue of assistance. Second, perseverance, patience. It is going to be a long challenge, a long problem. And third, reaching global south and fighting the Russian narrative in the so-called third countries.
Mr. Molterer.
Stay united. That's the key thing for me. And keep momentum. And for keeping momentum, it's necessary that we go also into really this public debate with our people, because we need the support of our people in the long-term perspective. That's, for me, the key thing.
Absolutely. Ivan, is there anything else left to say? Very strong messages.
Yeah, I think stronger leadership, unity, coordination in doing what is necessary despite of difficulties. And let me conclude positively, because just a few months ago we thought that next heating season will be maybe even worse and more dangerous than it was the first one. Now we see that no, that this energy transition was tremendously successful, and we know that it is no danger for the next heating season, which means it is possible to do a lot, but we have to be more united and have stronger political leadership to do what is necessary to do.
Thank you very much. This was excellent. Thanks for a very engaged audience. The good news is we all have the opportunity to take a break, and then we will reconvene at 10:15 to listen to the President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen. Thank you all, and have a great day.
Thank you.